Hello everyone, if you have your own paranormal experiences you'd like to share, please send them to our channel. Remember, we're not looking for fiction, but real accounts of unexplained events. Stay safe out there, and remember, not all ghosts are scary. Some just need help finding their way home. It was late October of 2016, and I was driving alone through upstate New York after spending the weekend visiting some friends. The air had that sharp bite of autumn, and the roads were lined with trees shedding the last of their leaves. By the time I left, it was already late, much later than I planned, and I knew I'd be driving for hours in the dark. That never really bothered me before. I actually liked long drives at night, less traffic, more time to think. The steady hum of the tires on asphalt was almost meditative. I'd spent the weekend at Mike and Sarah's place in Albany. We'd gone to college together, and these annual visits had become a tradition after graduation. We'd stayed up too late Saturday night, drinking beer and reminiscing about our shared memories, laughing at stories that probably weren't as funny as we remembered them being. Sunday had been lazy brunch that stretched into afternoon, a walk around the neighborhood, more conversation. The kind of weekend that makes you feel grounded, connected to something real. But I'd lingered too long. Sarah had offered to let me stay another night, sleep in their guest room, leave fresh in the morning. I should have said yes. I almost did. But I had work Monday morning, a presentation I couldn't miss, and I convinced myself I'd be fine. I'd made the drive dozens of times before. What was a few hours on the highway? So I left around 11, hugging them both goodbye, promising to text when I got home. The October night was clear and cold, stars visible in the gaps between the streetlights as I navigated through Albany's suburbs. I stopped at a gas station just outside the city limits, filled up my tank, grabbed a large coffee and a bag of trail mix. The attendant was a tired-looking kid who barely acknowledged me. I remember that detail now because he was the last person I spoke to before everything changed. I merged onto Route 17 a little after midnight. The highway was mostly empty, just an occasional pair of headlights in the distance, and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. Music on low, some indie station I'd found earlier that week, heater humming, coffee in the cup holder. The night felt still. Too still, in hindsight. The first hour passed without incident. I watched the mile markers slide by, the occasional exit ramp branching off into darkened towns I'd never visited. My mind wandered in that pleasant way it does on long drives, thinking about nothing and everything at once. Work deadlines. An argument I'd had with my sister 2 weeks prior that still bothered me. Whether I needed to get my car inspected soon. Mundane thoughts, comforting in their normalcy. About 40 minutes in, my GPS froze. It just stopped. The little arrow sat motionless on the screen even though I was still driving. I figured it was just bad reception, some of those areas are dead zones, but then it flickered back, recalculating. That robotic voice told me to take an exit ahead, one I didn't remember ever seeing before. The green highway sign came into view, Riverside Road. No town listed, no mileage, just that name. Something about it was odd. The ramp was cracked, narrow, and it dove sharply down into the woods. No lights. No other cars. If I'd been thinking clearly, I would have stayed on the highway. But the GPS insisted, and I was tired enough to just listen without questioning it. Besides, I told myself, maybe it knew a faster route. Maybe this was one of those local shortcuts that cut off 20 minutes of driving. I eased onto the exit. Immediately, it felt wrong. My headlights stretched ahead into a tunnel of trees, their branches curling overhead like they were trying to swallow the road. The pavement was faded, almost gray, with weeds poking through the cracks. I turned off the radio to concentrate. The silence pressed in like a weight. The temperature seemed to drop the moment I left the highway. I cranked up the heat, but it didn't help. There was a coldness that felt deeper than weather, something that settled into my bones. I rubbed my arms, suddenly aware of how alone I was. No houses visible through the trees. No power lines. Nothing to suggest civilization existed anywhere nearby. I told myself it was fine, that maybe this was just a shortcut. But the farther I went, the stranger it felt. The road twisted tightly, dipping and rising through the forest, and I hadn't seen a single sign, house, or streetlight. Just darkness and trees. The forest itself seemed wrong somehow. The trees were too dense, packed together in ways that didn't look natural. Their branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy so thick that my headlights barely penetrated more than 20 feet ahead. I noticed there was no underbrush, no small plants or bushes beneath the trees. Just bare earth and roots, like nothing else could grow there. I checked my phone, thinking I'd pull up Google Maps as a backup. No signal. Not even a single bar. The screen glowed uselessly in my hand before I tossed it into the passenger seat. My coffee was getting cold, but I took a sip anyway, needing something to do with my hands. The liquid tasted bitter, metallic. I wondered if I'd left it sitting too long in the gas station cup holder before buying it. The road seemed to narrow with each passing minute. What had started as a 2-lane back road was becoming barely wide enough for one vehicle. Tree branches scraped against my passenger side mirror, a sound like fingernails on metal. I slowed down, worried about damaging my car, but also increasingly anxious about where this road was taking me. Then I saw them. At first, I thought it was an animal. Eyes reflecting my headlights from the trees. But they were too high. Not up in the branches, but about 5 feet off the ground, fixed directly on my car. Deer usually dart away, but these didn't move. They stayed locked on me as I passed. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a raccoon on a branch, maybe a trick of the light. I'd read somewhere that lack of sleep could cause hallucinations, mild ones at first. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. The weekend had been long, lots of late nights and early mornings. This could just be my brain playing tricks on me. But then I saw another pair. And another. Always on the edge of the road, always the same height, always unblinking. I pressed the gas a little harder. Minutes passed. The eyes kept appearing. Sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right, sometimes in pairs, sometimes more. My skin crawled. There was no sound except the drone of my engine, no sign of life except those eyes. I tried to focus on the road ahead, to ignore the periphery, but it was impossible. They drew my attention like magnets. The eyes were all the same color, a pale, yellowish white that didn't quite look animal. They didn't blink. They didn't move as I passed. They just watched, patient and still, as if they had all the time in the world. My heart was racing now, a steady thud in my chest that made it hard to breathe properly. I realized I was holding the steering wheel so tightly my hands ached. I tried to relax, to convince myself this was nothing, just wildlife and exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But some primal part of my brain was screaming danger. The road narrowed further, hemmed in by dense trees that seemed to lean closer with every curve. My chest tightened, a low panic building, but I kept telling myself to stay calm. All I had to do was keep driving until I found an intersection. Eventually, this road had to connect to something else. Roads didn't just go nowhere. Except this one seemed to. But the road never branched. It only wound deeper, twisting endlessly through the dark. I checked my odometer compulsively, watching the tenths of a mile tick by with agonizing slowness. 1 mile. 2 miles. 5 miles. How long was this road? Where was it going? The GPS screen had gone completely black. I tapped it a few times, then held down the power button. Nothing. It was dead, completely unresponsive, as if the battery had drained all at once even though it had been fully charged when I'd started driving. A new sound joined the hum of my engine, a low creaking, like wood under stress. At first I thought it was my car, some problem with the suspension or frame. But then I realized it was coming from outside. The trees. They were swaying slightly, even though there was no wind. I could see them moving in my headlights, a slow rhythmic motion that made my stomach turn. I decided I needed to turn around. This was insane. Whatever shortcut the GPS had thought it was showing me, it was wrong. I needed to get back to the highway, even if it meant driving another hour or 2 out of my way. My headlights finally caught a stretch wide enough to attempt it. I slowed, checked my mirrors, and began to reverse. That's when my beam swept across the tree line. And I saw them. Not animals. Not hunters. Figures. They stood just inside the trees. Pale, almost glowing against the darkness. Thin, impossibly tall, with limbs too long for their bodies. Their heads lolled at unnatural angles, tilted like their necks had been broken. And every single one of them was staring at me. I froze. My foot hovered between brake and gas, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more, just standing in the shadows, their eyes catching the light in that same glassy reflection. They weren't human. They couldn't be. The proportions were all wrong. Their arms hung down past their knees, ending in hands with too many fingers. Their legs bent backward at the joints, like bird legs. And their faces, God, their faces. Smooth and featureless except for those eyes. No nose, no mouth that I could see. Just eyes, wide and unblinking, reflecting my headlights like mirrors. They wore nothing. Their skin was the color of old paper, stretched tight over visible bones. I could see their ribs, each one outlined beneath that thin skin. They didn't breathe. I watched for several seconds, frozen in horror, and didn't see any of them move to breathe. Then, without warning, they shifted. Not stepping forward, not moving closer, just tilting their heads all at once, like they were curious. The motion was so slow, so synchronized, it made my stomach twist. It was like watching a flock of birds move in unison, except these things weren't birds. They weren't anything I'd ever seen or imagined. One of them raised an arm, that too long limb extending toward my car. The fingers, I counted 6, maybe 7 spread wide, reaching. That was enough. I floored the gas, swerving back onto the road and tearing forward as fast as I could. The car roared through the silence, engine straining, tires skidding on loose gravel. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. To get away from those things, those figures that couldn't possibly exist but did. My speedometer climbed 40, 50, 60 miles per hour. Too fast for this narrow, winding road, but I couldn't bring myself to slow down. The car bounced over potholes and bumps, the suspension groaning. A branch smacked my windshield hard enough to make me flinch, leaving a scratch across the glass. The eyes didn't stop. They kept appearing in the trees as I drove, mile after mile, sometimes closer to the road, sometimes further back. Always watching. And now I knew what was behind them. Those things, those creatures, standing motionless in the dark. I caught glimpses of them as I sped past. Standing between trees. Perched on branches that should have broken under their weight but didn't. Huddled in small groups, their heads turning in unison to follow my progress. There were dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. The forest was full of them. At one point, I swear I saw one of the figures standing in the middle of the road ahead. I blinked and it was gone, but the impression of it lingered, burned into my vision. Tall, wrong, waiting. I swerved anyway, my tires squealing, heart leaping into my throat. The car fishtailed slightly before I regained control, knuckles white on the wheel. My GPS flickered again. The screen scrambled, the map dissolving into static. But in that static, just for a moment, I saw something. Shapes. Figures. The same pale forms I was seeing in the forest, rendered in digital pixels on my GPS screen. They seemed to be moving, walking in a slow procession toward a point at the center of the screen. Then the screen went black again. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. I had been on that road for nearly 2 hours. But when I checked my odometer, it didn't make sense. I hadn't driven more than 30 miles. It was like I was trapped in a loop, covering the same stretch of road over and over without realizing it. My hands shook on the wheel. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The air in the car felt thick, heavy, like I was underwater. I cracked the window, desperate for fresh air, and immediately regretted it. The smell that wafted in was horrible, rotting leaves, stagnant water, and something else. Something sweet and wrong, like meat left out too long. I rolled the window back up, gagging. The road kept winding, the trees kept pressing in, and the figures never left. Always in my periphery, always in the beams of my headlights, like they were guiding me deeper. Hurting me towards something. I tried to think rationally, to problem solve, but panic was making it difficult. What were my options? I couldn't turn around, they were behind me too. I couldn't stop, God knows what would happen if I stopped. I could only keep driving forward, hoping that eventually this road would end, would spit me out somewhere normal and safe. But what if it didn't? What if this road just kept going forever, an endless loop through an impossible forest? What if I was already lost, had been lost the moment I took that exit? No. No, I couldn't think like that. Roads had to end. Geography had rules. This was still Earth, still the real world, even if it felt like I'd driven into some nightmare pocket dimension. There would be an end. There had to be. I started talking to myself, out loud, just to hear a human voice. You're okay. You're fine. Just keep driving. You'll find a way out. This isn't real. Those things aren't real. You're tired, you're seeing things, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. The words sounded hollow, desperate. But I kept saying them anyway, a mantra against the creeping terror that was threatening to overwhelm me completely. That's when my car started acting up. The engine coughed, sputtered. The headlights dimmed for a moment, then brightened again. All my dashboard lights flickered in sequence, like a wave rolling across the instruments. The radio, which had been off for the past hour, suddenly turned on at full volume, blasting nothing but static so loud I screamed. I fumbled for the volume knob, twisted it down, but the static continued. I stabbed the power button. Nothing. The radio wouldn't turn off. The static filled the car, drowning out even the sound of my engine. And in that static, I heard something. Voices. Faint, distorted, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Or maybe not a language at all, just sounds that mimic speech, syllables strung together in patterns that hurt to hear. I punched the radio with my fist, hard enough to split my knuckle. The static cut out abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it was almost worse. The engine coughed again. The car jerked forward, slowing despite my foot on the gas. I checked my fuel gauge. Half a tank. More than enough. But the car was dying anyway, losing power like it was running on fumes. No, 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 I chanted, pumping the gas pedal. Don't do this. Please don't do this. The car rolled slower, slower. The engine made a grinding noise, metal on metal. My headlights dimmed to a dull yellow glow, barely illuminating 10 feet ahead. I was going to have to stop. The car was dying, and I was going to be stranded here, alone in the dark with those things. But then a miracle, or something like it. The engine caught, roared back to life. The headlights brightened. Whatever had been strangling my car released its grip, and I surged forward, back up to speed. I sobbed with relief, tears streaming down my face. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the wheel steady. Every instinct screamed at me to close my eyes, to just shut out the horror surrounding me, but I forced myself to keep them open, keep watching the road. The figures were closer now. Not just in the trees anymore, but at the edge of the road. Standing in the gravel shoulder, their toes just touching the pavement. As I passed, they turned their heads to follow, that same slow synchronized movement. Some of them raised their arms, reaching toward my car as I sped by. I saw one step onto the road behind me, visible in my rearview mirror. Then another. They were moving now, walking into the road, forming a line behind my car. I watched in the mirror, horrified, as more and more of them emerged from the forest, joining the procession. They were following me. I pressed harder on the gas, but the speedometer wouldn't go above 65. The car was maxed out, engine screaming. I glanced back at the mirror. The figures weren't running, weren't even walking fast. They moved with that same slow, steady gait, but somehow they were keeping pace with me. Like distance and speed didn't apply to them the way it did to everything else. A sound started building outside the car. Low at first, barely audible over the engine. But growing louder. It took me a moment to identify it, singing. Those things were singing, their voices blending in an eerie harmony that made my teeth ache. No words, just a rising and falling melody that sounded like wind through a canyon, like water over stones, like nothing human could produce. The singing grew louder, surrounding my car, seeming to come from all directions at once. I clapped my hands over my ears, still trying to steer with my knees, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head now, vibrating through my skull. Images flashed through my mind. Not my memories, but something else. A forest, ancient and vast. A circle of stones. Figures dancing around a fire. Humans kneeling in a circle, heads bowed. And standing over them, those pale figures, those things, looming in the firelight. I shook my head violently, trying to clear it. "Get out, get out, get out," I whispered. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The trees thinned. The road straightened. And without realizing how, I was back on Route 17. My GPS chirped to life, the map normal, as if nothing had happened. The clock read 12:46 a.m. I slammed the brakes and pulled over onto the shoulder, gasping for air. My hands were stiff, my knuckles white from gripping the wheel. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty highway, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion, a hallucination, anything but what it felt like. The highway was normal. Streetlights every half mile. A digital billboard advertising a hotel chain. In the distance, I could see the lights of a town. Real, normal, blessedly mundane civilization. I checked my phone. It had signal again, full bars. The time matched my car's clock, 12:46 a.m. I looked at my GPS. It showed me exactly where I was on Route 17, still miles from home, but on a road I recognized. There was no exit for Riverside Road anywhere nearby. No evidence of where I'd been. I pulled up my map history, but there was nothing. According to my phone, I'd been on Route 17 the entire time, hadn't deviated at all. Hands shaking, I opened the driver's side door and stepped out. I needed to move, to feel solid ground beneath my feet. The air was cold, but normal autumn cold, not that bone-deep wrongness from the forest. I could hear distant traffic, the buzz of power lines overhead. Normal sounds. I walked around my car, inspecting it. The passenger side mirror was fine, no scratches from branches. The windshield had no cracks. There was no mud or leaves stuck to the tires, nothing to suggest I'd been driving on that decrepit road. My car looked exactly as it had when I'd left the gas station. But my knuckle was bleeding where I'd punched the radio. That was real. And I could still smell that horrible scent in my nostrils, rotten sweetness and wrong. I got back in the car and just sat there. Other vehicles passed by occasionally, normal people driving to normal places. None of them knew. None of them had any idea what I'd just experienced. Eventually, I started driving again. I kept to Route 17 the rest of the way, ignoring my GPS entirely. I didn't arrive home until nearly 5 in the morning. I'd driven barely 30 miles per hour the entire way, terrified of every exit ramp, every side road. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky. I went inside and took the longest, hottest shower of my life, trying to scrub away the memory of those figures, that singing, that wrongness. I called in sick to work. I couldn't have given that presentation even if someone held a gun to my head. I spent the entire day in bed, curtains drawn, trying to sleep but mostly just staring at the ceiling. But here's the thing. I've looked since then. Riverside Road doesn't exist. Not on GPS, not on Google Maps, not in any county records. I asked people from the area, even showed them the stretch of highway where I swear I saw the sign. They all told me the same thing, there is no exit there. I became obsessed with finding it. I spent hours online, digging through old maps, historical records, anything that might explain what I'd experienced. I found stories, lots of them, actually. Urban legends about weird roads that appear and disappear. Phantom highways. The Road of Bones. Black Dog Road. Dead Man's Curve. Every region had its own version. Most were just stories, campfire tales to spook teenagers. But some were reported experiences, similar to mine. People driving alone at night who took a wrong turn and ended up somewhere impossible. Most of them made it back. Some didn't. I found one account from 1987, a trucker who claimed he'd been driving through upstate New York when his CB radio died and his truck took an exit he didn't remember choosing. He described a narrow road through dense forest, eyes watching from the trees, figures that looked like stretched out humans standing in the darkness. He'd driven for hours before finding himself back on the highway with no time missing. He'd quit trucking after that, moved to Arizona where the landscape was open and you could see for miles in every direction. Another account from 2003, a college student driving home from a party. She'd taken an exit her GPS recommended, ended up on a road that twisted through forest, saw pale figures watching her from the trees. She'd blacked out while driving, didn't remember how she got back to the highway. Her car was found the next morning parked at a rest stop 50 miles from where she'd taken the exit. She had no memory of driving there. Her clock had barely moved, even though she'd been gone for hours, according to her roommate who'd reported her missing. There were more. Dozens of accounts scattered across decades, spread out over different states. All similar. All involving that same combination: wrong turn, narrow road, forest, watching eyes, impossible figures. Some people saw them clearly. Others only caught glimpses. But the core was always the same. I tried to find the trucker from 1987. I tracked down contact information, sent letters, made phone calls. His daughter finally responded. She told me her father had died in 2012, but that he'd never stopped talking about that night. He'd become paranoid, obsessive. He'd covered his windows with aluminum foil, claimed they could find him anywhere. She thought he'd had a psychotic break. I didn't tell her what I thought. I went back to that stretch of Route 17. Multiple times, actually. I drove it during the day, at night, at dawn and dusk. I pulled over at every exit, checked every sign. No Riverside Road. No cracked, narrow ramp diving into the forest. Just normal exits leading to normal towns. But once, just once, I thought I saw something. It was late November, nearly dusk. I was driving slowly, scanning the tree line. And just for a moment, I saw a sign. Green, reflective, exactly like a highway exit sign. The letters seemed to shimmer, hard to read in the fading light. But I swear it said Riverside Road. I blinked and it was gone. Not hidden or obscured, just gone, like it had never been there. I didn't stop. I kept driving. And yet, I know what I saw. I don't drive at night anymore. I can't. I plan my trips carefully now, making sure I always arrive before dark. If I'm visiting friends, I leave early in the afternoon. I take vacation days if I have to. My friends think I'm being paranoid. My family worries. But I can't explain it to them. How do you tell someone you've driven through a place that doesn't exist? That you've seen things that can't be real? The dream started about a month later. Always the same. I'm driving through that forest, but I'm not in my car anymore. I'm walking. The figures are all around me, standing silent in the trees. They're not threatening, not reaching for me. Just watching. Waiting. And in the dreams, I always walk deeper. Further into the forest, following that road. I can hear singing in the distance, that same eerie harmony. I know I shouldn't go toward it. I know something terrible waits there. But I keep walking anyway, like my body isn't my own. I always wake up before I reach the end. Gasping, sweating, my heart racing. And for just a moment, just a split second before I'm fully awake, I can smell it. That rotting sweetness. That wrongness. It's been years now. Life goes on. I got a new job, one closer to home with less travel. I started dating someone, though I haven't told her about that night. How could I? I barely believe it myself sometimes. On normal days, in bright sunshine, surrounded by people, it all feels like a fever dream. Just exhaustion and an overactive imagination, like I told myself that night. But sometimes, even on busy roads, even surrounded by other cars, I'll catch a glimpse in the trees. Eyes. Staring. Waiting. And I know if I ever take a wrong turn again, they'll be there. Last week, I was driving to the grocery store. Midday, plenty of traffic, familiar route. My GPS was off, I don't use it anymore unless I absolutely have to. I was stopped at a red light, waiting for it to change, when I glanced at the car next to me. The driver was a woman, maybe 60, gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was staring straight ahead, hands at 10 and 2, completely still. Too still. And her eyes, I could see them in profile, were wide, unblinking, glassy. She looked terrified. The light turned green. She didn't move. Cars behind her started honking. Still she sat there, frozen. I was about to get out, to check if she was okay, when she suddenly jerked forward, almost causing an accident. Her car swerved, overcorrected, then straightened out. She drove away normally after that, like nothing had happened. But I saw her face in that moment. And I recognized that expression. The same one I must have had that night. The look of someone who's seen something impossible, something their brain can't process. I wonder where she'd been. What she'd seen. I wonder how many of us are out there, driving through normal days with the memory of something abnormal burned into our minds. The world is thinner than we think. The boundaries between the normal and the not normal, they're not as solid as we'd like to believe. There are cracks. Roads that lead sideways, into places that shouldn't exist. And once you've driven one of those roads, once you've seen what's waiting in those impossible places, you can never completely forget. I still drive. I have to, life requires it. But I'm careful now. So careful. I double check every turn. I never deviate from known routes. I keep my GPS off most of the time, and when I do use it, I question every direction it gives me. And I never, ever drive at night in forests. Because somewhere out there, on a road that isn't on any map, those figures are still standing in the trees. Still watching. Still waiting. For me, maybe. Or maybe for the next person who takes a wrong turn. Either way, they're patient. They have all the time in the world. And I know, deep down in a place I don't like to acknowledge, that this isn't over. That night was just an introduction, a glimpse into something vast and old and utterly indifferent to human understanding. Sometimes I think I got lucky. I saw them and I survived and I made it back. But other times, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if I really did make it back. Or if some part of me is still driving that road, trapped in that loop, while the thing sitting here in my bed is something else wearing my face. I don't know. I can't know. That's the worst part, the uncertainty that gnaws at the edges of everything. The inability to ever completely trust reality again. All I know for certain is this: Riverside Road is real. Those figures are real. And somewhere between where we are and where they are, there's a threshold. A place where roads lead to darkness. And if you're not careful, if you take just one wrong turn, you'll find it too. I still have nightmares. Still wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, convinced I can hear that singing just outside my window. Still check and recheck my locks, though I know locks wouldn't stop them if they wanted in. But mostly, I try to live normally. I go to work. I spend time with friends. I pretend the world makes sense. And I hope I never see that exit sign again. Because next time, I don't think I'll make it back. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey. Here are a couple more videos for you to check out.